It was 1:43 in the afternoon on February 9th, 2001, 9 miles south of Hawaii. Clear skies, calm water. On the surface, 13 Japanese high school students were preparing their fishing lines. They were on day 33 of a 74-day training voyage, learning navigation, engineering the sea. 400 feet below them, nobody knew they were there. Then the submarine fired its ballast tanks, and in less than 10 minutes, 4 of those students were dead, along with their 2 teachers and 3 of the crew. Nobody on that submarine meant to kill anyone. That is what makes this story so difficult to sit with. Here is what you need to understand about that morning. The Ehime Maru was a Japanese fisheries training ship, 191 feet long, owned by the government of Ehime Prefecture. She had left her home port of Uwajima on January 10th, 2001, carrying 35 people, 20 crew, 13 high school students, 2 teachers. These were teenagers, 16, 17 years old, kids who wanted to work on fishing boats when they grew up. They were learning navigation, marine engineering, how to cast long lines for tuna. Their school had been sending ships on this voyage for years. It was routine, safe, completely unremarkable. On the morning of February 9th, the Ehime Maru had just left Honolulu Harbor after a brief stop to fix a broken air conditioning unit. She was heading for fishing grounds 300 miles south of Pearl Harbor. 9 miles out, the water around her was not restricted. Commercial ships transited this area every single day. At the same time, deep beneath that water, the USS Greeneville was preparing for something else entirely. The Greeneville was a Los Angeles-class nuclear attack submarine, 362 feet long, 106 crew, one of the most capable vessels in the United States Navy. But on this particular day, she was also carrying 16 civilian guests. This was part of the Navy's Distinguished Visitor Embarkation Program, a public relations exercise. Ordinary Americans, business people, community leaders invited aboard to see what life was like on a nuclear submarine, a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. The timeline was tight. The submarine needed to be back at Pearl Harbor by 3 p.m. Some crew members were already quietly worried they wouldn't make it. Nobody said anything out loud. Here is where small problems started becoming large ones. Shortly after departure, the sonar repeater screen in the control room stopped working. This screen mirrored what the dedicated sonar operators could see, giving officers in the control room a second set of eyes on nearby vessels. Without it, crew members had to physically walk back and forth between the control room and the sonar room to relay information manually. This was now standard operating procedure for the day. At 12:32 p.m., sonar detected a contact bearing almost due north. They designated it Sierra 13. The signal was weak. The bearing stayed nearly constant. The crew assessed it as distant, not an immediate priority. What nobody realized was that the bearing stayed constant because both vessels were on a direct course toward each other. Sierra 13 was the Ehime Maru, and she was getting closer. At 1:10 p.m., all 16 civilian guests were called into the control room for demonstrations. The submarine began high-speed maneuvers, sharp dives, and steep ascents. This generated turbulence that flooded the hydrophones. For 6 full minutes, sonar was effectively blind. During this time, the commanding officer was entertaining the civilian visitors. Critical contact information was not being fully updated. The tactical picture, the submarine's understanding of exactly what was around them, was slipping. At 1:31 p.m., the captain ordered the submarine to periscope depth. Navy procedure required an 8-minute window for instrument checks, contact confirmation, and a formal briefing. The captain ordered it completed in 5 minutes. The officer of the deck found the request unusual. He said nothing. The standard turn to check blind spots, normally held for 3 minutes per leg, was completed in 20 seconds. A sonar operator confirmed Sierra 13 was now at 4,000 yards. miles, close enough to require an immediate report to the officer in charge. The report was not made. The captain took the periscope. He searched for Sierra 13. He saw the island of Oahu, an airplane taking off, haze on the horizon, no ship. The Ehime Maru was 2,315 yards away, just over a mile, bearing almost directly ahead. Her light hull had disappeared into the white of the waves. Her narrow bow was invisible against the glare. The captain ordered the submarine down. The final maneuver of the day was an emergency ballast blow. In a real emergency, this procedure blasts compressed air into the ballast tanks, forcing water out in seconds, sending the submarine shooting upward to the surface at high speed, normally reserved for combat situations. Today, it was a demonstration for the guests. Civilians were placed at various controls, one at the helm, one at the air valves, one at the diving alarm, each supervised by a crew member, but with their hands on the equipment. At 1:43 p.m., the alarm sounded. The submarine accelerated upward from 400 feet, faster than any normal surfacing. On the surface, the crew of the Ehime Maru were preparing their fishing lines. The water was calm, the sky was clear. It was just another ordinary afternoon at sea. Then the bow of the submarine erupted through the surface directly beneath them. The Greeneville's reinforced rudder tore through the Ehime Maru's hull from starboard to port, ripping through the student lounge, through the engine room, through the control spaces. Power failed instantly. The emergency backup failed 5 seconds later. Water and diesel poured through the open doors. The captain of the Ehime Maru grabbed the radio, dead. He activated the emergency beacon. Students and crew climbed to the roof of the pilot house. The waves swept them into the ocean. In less than 10 minutes, the Ehime Maru was gone. The crew of the Greeneville felt the impact and had no idea what they had hit. When they surfaced and looked, they saw debris, oil, life rafts, people in the water. A Coast Guard helicopter arrived 45 minutes after the collision. Rescue boats followed. Of the 35 people who had been on the Ehime Maru, 26 were pulled from the water alive. 9 were not. 4 high school students, 2 teachers, 3 crew members. The youngest victim was 16 years old. Japan was furious, not just at the collision, but at what came out afterward. Civilians had been at the controls of an American nuclear submarine. The captain had rushed procedures, critical steps had been skipped, and the initial apology from the United States was slow in coming. Japan's foreign minister called it an extremely grave situation. President Bush went on television to apologize. Colin Powell apologized. Donald Rumsfeld apologized. The Navy held a court of inquiry. 3 admirals presided for 2 weeks. The conclusion: the captain of the USS Greeneville bore primary responsibility. He had rushed the procedures, failed to complete proper contact analysis, ordered a high-speed surfacing maneuver without adequate confirmation that the area was clear. He received non-judicial punishment. He was allowed to retire with an honorable discharge. The families wanted more than that. Many felt the system had protected its own. In October 2001, the U.S. Navy raised the Ehime Maru from 2,000 feet of ocean floor. Navy and Japanese divers conducted 526 dives over 29 days. The salvage cost over $60 million. 8 bodies were recovered. 1 student was never found. In December 2002, the captain of the USS Greeneville traveled to Japan. He visited the school. He placed white lilies before the memorial. He read the names of the dead aloud. He bowed his head. In Hawaii today, a memorial sits in Kakako Waterfront Park. 9 stones, 9 names. At the center, an anchor salvaged from the Ehime Maru. Every year on the anniversary, and the father of the student whose body was never found comes to Hawaii. He stands before the memorial, and he bows his head 9 times.